6.6 and 6.7 are about complex numbers, and this will complete chapter 6. 6.6 is the basic intro to complex numbers, and then I think 6.7 is adding and subtracting complex numbers, or maybe multiplying and dividing. We'll see. So recall that for a greater than or equal to 0, square root of a is the non-negative real number such that square root of a times square root of a equals a. Or in other words, square root of a squared is a. Right? That's for a greater than or equal to 0. So similarly, define I, this is the letter I, to be a number such that I squared is negative 1. So I can't be a real number because any real number, if you square it, it's either going to be positive, or if the original number is 0, if you square it, you get 0. So you can't get a negative number out of it. So I is obviously not a real number. So we just made up a letter I so that if you square it, you get minus 1, negative 1. Since a squared is greater than or equal to 0 for any real number a, I is not a real number. Yeah, I just told you that. Forgot I wrote that down. So using I, we can find square roots of negative numbers. So I squared equals negative 1 then means that I equals the square root of negative 1. Right? And square root of negative 1 times square root of negative 1 equals negative 1. Okay, so this is a little weird. It's not like with real numbers. Well, it's similar, right? Using the rule square root of AB equals square root of A times square root of B if at most one of AB is negative gives, for example, square root of negative 1 equals square root of negative 1 times 3. I'm sorry, start that again. Right here. Square root of negative 3 equals negative 1 times the square root of 3 equals negative 1. Square root of negative 1 times square root of 3 equals I times 3. Okay, so if you look at that from beginning to end, the first and last step, square root of negative 3 is I times the square root of 3. So if you have a negative inside, if you quote bring the negative out, it becomes I in a sense. That's a shorthand way of thinking of it, but this is what's really happening. You got square root of negative 1 times 3, then you got square root of negative 1 times square root of 3, square root of negative 1 is I. Okay? So in general, for any positive real number, b, square root of negative b is I times square root of b, also known as square root of b times I. Okay? For any real number b, bi is called a pure imaginary number. The I stands for imaginary. They're not really any more imaginary than like a negative number, but when they were first invented, they were called imaginary numbers because they didn't have any concrete way of representing them at first. We do now, but they didn't at first. Okay, so that's a pure imaginary number, so that's a good thing to remember.